The phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning, and Marcus Everett already had his jacket on. He was standing at the kitchen counter with the week's delivery schedule in his hand, a folded piece of paper, not a screen, because Marcus did not trust apps for things that actually mattered. Apps crashed and corrupted and ran out of battery at the worst possible moments. Paper stayed. He had been running Everett Construction this way since his mid-20s, and not once in 16 years had the company missed a critical deadline because a folded piece of paper had malfunctioned. The screen said Dale. Marcus answered before the second buzz. What happened? He did not frame it as a question, because Dale Cooper did not call before 7 in the morning with good news. North Wall, Dale said without preamble, because 9 years of working together had made preamble unnecessary between them. There's a crack running diagonal from the lower left base, about 3 feet, maybe 3.5. The temperature dropped hard last night and I came in early to check the new pour and there it was. Marcus set the delivery schedule on the counter. He picked up his keys. Inspector is at 9. Yes. I will be there in 15 minutes. He was there in 12. Cedar Valley Road at that hour was mostly clear. Just delivery trucks and a few early commuters. And Marcus drove the way he did everything, which was directly and without wasted motion. He had turned the radio off somewhere around his 40th birthday and had not missed it. The truck was a space for thinking, and Marcus thought better in silence. The Cranford site was the largest project Everett Construction had ever taken on. 3 floors of commercial space on the ground level, and 4 floors of residential above it, in the east end of Cedar Falls where the city had been slowly and carefully turning old industrial land into something people actually wanted to live in. 18 months of work. 32 people on his crew. A contract that had required Marcus to put up guarantees he did not take lightly, and a reputation he had spent 20 years building so carefully that a single bad pour had the potential to cost him more than the job itself. He came through the gate at 7:02 and felt the crew watching him, the way a crew always watches the man in charge when something has gone wrong, not with accusation, but with the particular held-breath attention of people who are waiting to see how the weight gets carried. Marcus had been carrying things in front of people his entire career, and he had learned early that how you walked into a problem was how the people around you decided to feel about it. He walked directly to the north wall. The crack was exactly as Dale had described. Diagonal, starting at the lower left base of the section poured the previous afternoon, running up and to the right for 3.5 feet by Marcus's eye. In some places it was barely wider than a seam in fabric, in others it was marginally more. Nothing catastrophic by itself. But Marcus had been in this industry long enough to know that concrete did not crack without a reason, and the reason mattered as much as the crack. More, sometimes. He crouched and looked at it without speaking for 60 full seconds. Nobody came close. Dale stood 6 feet away with his clipboard, giving Marcus the silence that Marcus needed, because Dale understood that interrupting Marcus Everett while he was looking at a problem was approximately as productive as interrupting a surgeon mid-operation. Marcus stood up. Batch records from yesterday's afternoon pour, he said. I want them in my hands before 8:30. Kevin from Materials, on the phone, not a message, talking to me directly. Already called him, Dale said. He's coming in now. Good. When the inspector gets here at 9, we walk him through everything we know. Every record, every number, every conversation. If the mix ratio was off, we tell him. If this section needs to come down and be re-poured, that is what we do. We don't patch it. We don't minimize it. We fix it. He looked at the wall once more, with the expression of a man who understands that honesty in construction is not just ethics. It is the only version of this work that holds up over time. Then he walked to the site office to begin the process of finding out exactly what had happened. Kevin from Materials arrived at 7:50. By 8:20, they had the answer. A small variance in the water-to-cement ratio from the previous afternoon's batch, caused by a handoff failure between the rotating crew shifts. One crew had adjusted the ratio for the afternoon temperature conditions. The incoming crew had not been told about the adjustment in writing, only verbally, and somewhere in that gap the information had fallen through. Not a dramatic failure. Not the kind of thing that made construction news, but concrete was an exact science when you were talking about load-bearing walls, and exact meant exact, and anything else meant you stood in front of a city inspector and told him the full truth. Marcus walked George, the city inspector, through everything at 9 o'clock. He showed him the batch records. He explained the variance. He showed him the new handoff protocol that Kevin had already written up during the 2 hours between arriving at the site and the inspector's visit. He showed him the corrective plan and the revised timeline. George was 61 years old and had been doing this job since Marcus was a teenager, at his father's side on a construction site, learning what the smell of freshly poured concrete meant. George had the particular stillness of a man who had heard every possible version of a construction problem and had developed over decades a finely calibrated sense for which version was being told truthfully. He looked at the records for 3 minutes. He looked at the wall. He walked the section with Marcus and asked 2 technical questions that Marcus answered without hesitation because he knew the numbers the way he knew everything about his projects, from the inside out. George signed off on the corrective plan. At the gate he paused and looked at Marcus. Most contractors patch something like this and hope it holds until the building is signed off, he said. I know, Marcus said. You didn't. No? George gave a single nod, the kind that carries more weight than a speech. Good outfit, Mr. Everett. I mean that. Marcus thanked him and walked back to the site. He spent the rest of the morning on the repour schedule, the new handoff protocol, and the call to the client, which went almost exactly as he had predicted it would go. Unhappiness, then questions, then the slow arrival at the understanding that a week's delay was better than a structural problem in a building where people were going to live. He thanked them for their understanding and ended the call and sat in the quiet of his office. On the corner of his desk, in a plain wooden frame that he had never replaced because he had never found a reason to, was a photograph of a woman laughing at something just outside the edge of the shot. She was standing in front of a lake on the Oregon coast, squinting into the sun, her dark curly hair blown sideways by the coastal wind. She was 40 years old in the photograph. She looked completely and effortlessly happy, in the way that some people look happy. Not performed, not for the camera, but because something genuinely funny had happened a second before, and her body had not finished responding to it yet. Elaine Everett, his wife. Marcus looked at the photograph for 2 seconds, the way he always allowed himself 2 seconds, and then he turned back to his papers. Dale knocked on the door just before 4. Repour is confirmed for Thursday, Dale said. Materials are set. Crew rotation is updated. Good. Dale lingered in the doorway with both hands in his jacket pockets, which Marcus recognized as the posture of a man who had something non-work related to say, and was marshaling his willingness to say it. Say it, Marcus told him. Dale met his eyes. You look worn out, Marcus. Not work tired. Not today tired. I mean the underneath kind. The kind that lives below everything else, and never quite goes away, because you never let it. Marcus held his gaze steadily. I'm fine. I know you believe that, Dale said. I also know that I've worked for you for 9 years, and I've seen you handle things that would drop most people, and I've never once seen you handle yourself the way you handle everything else. You run the company, you handle the projects, you manage the crew. But when I ask how you are, you say fine, and the word fine has been doing a lot of work for a long time. Marcus looked at him. Good night, Dale, he said. Dale held his gaze for one more moment, then nodded, pulled his jacket closed, and left without another word. Which was, Marcus reflected, exactly why he had kept the man for 9 years. He left the office at 6:30 and drove home through Cedar Falls in the early November dark. The neighborhood on Millbrook Lane was doing its particular evening thing, the houses lit from inside with the warm yellow of people living their ordinary lives, a neighbor walking a dog up the sidewalk in a red coat, a car with one broken taillight moving slowly around the corner. It was a neighborhood that Elaine had chosen the way she chose everything, which was with full research and absolute certainty, and it looked exactly the way it had looked when she was alive because Marcus had not changed it, which was a decision he had never made consciously and had never unmade. He parked in the driveway and sat in the truck. He did this every evening. Not long, a minute, sometimes less, but he sat before going in. If he had examined it precisely, which he did not allow himself to do, he might have found something in that pause that had to do with the weight of walking into a house that was still entirely hers in every way that mattered, a house she had tiled and curtained and arranged and made into the place she wanted it to be, a house that held her in every corner and never let him forget it. But Marcus did not examine it. He just sat for a minute, and then he went inside. The house was quiet. Caleb's light was on upstairs, casting its thin line under his door. the reliable sign that the boy was home, and present in the only way he had been present for much of the past 2 years. Caleb was 17 now. He had Elaine's dark eyes, and Elaine's quality of going completely still when he was thinking through something carefully. He had her laugh too, though Marcus had not heard it in a while. He was a good kid, not in the easy, uncomplicated way, but in the deeper way that matters more, the way that shows up in how a person treats people when they think nobody is watching. Marcus made dinner: pasta, jar sauce, bread from the bag. He set 2 places at the table, because he always set 2 places at the table, even on the nights he ate alone, which were most of them. He knocked on Caleb's door at 7 and said dinner was ready, and Caleb said he'd be down in a minute, and Marcus ate alone at the kitchen table, with the particular quiet of a room where someone is supposed to be and isn't. Caleb came down at 8. He reheated his plate, sat at the kitchen table, scrolled his phone with the loose, automatic ease of a teenager who had been sitting in his room for several hours, and was now briefly willing to be in a shared space. Marcus came to the kitchen doorway. "History project," Marcus said. "Industrial Revolution. You said you had it." Caleb looked up. "I do. Textile mills. 3 sources, good ones." He paused. "I'm almost done with the outline. That's ahead of schedule." "Yeah." A small beat of something that might have been a response to the compliment, then nothing. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. He wanted to ask something real. He always wanted to ask something real, and he always ran up against the same problem, which was that he did not know which door the real question was behind, and by the time he was close to finding it, Caleb had usually finished eating. "How's Owen?" he asked. Owen was Caleb's friend, the one mentioned most, which meant the most reliable one. "Good, he got his license." "Good for him." Caleb nodded. He looked at his plate. "You seem tired," he said quietly, which caught Marcus off guard, because Caleb rarely volunteered observations. "Long day," Marcus said. Caleb looked at him for a moment with Elaine's eyes. "Okay," he said. "Just that. But in the particular way of someone who means something larger." Marcus said goodnight at 9:30. He went upstairs. He brushed his teeth, and changed, and turned off the light, and lay down on his side of the bed. The other side was cool and undisturbed, exactly as it had been for 3 years. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around him. The pipes ticked. The November wind moved through the bare oak trees in the front yard. A car went slowly down Millbrook Lane, and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling. He thought about the report schedule. He thought about the new handoff protocol. He thought about Dale's eyes when Marcus had said, "I'm fine," the particular way a person looks when they know the answer is not true, but have decided not to push further. He thought about Elaine for a moment, not the managed, brief thought he usually allowed, but a flash of the real thing, the actual physical fact of her, the way her hands moved when she was explaining something she cared about, the way she could walk into any room and know immediately how every person in it was feeling without being told. He pushed it back, the way he always did, organized it, contained it, put it where it went. He closed his eyes. Outside, to the west, clouds were beginning to stack on each other in the dark, in the way that November clouds did when they meant business. The forecast had said nothing about it. Weather apps and November in Cedar Falls had a complicated relationship that no developer had yet managed to fully resolve. The storm was coming. Marcus did not know it yet. He was asleep before 10:30, which was the only kindness he regularly gave himself without argument, and the oak trees moved in the rising wind, and somewhere down Hollow Creek Road, a cardboard box sat dry in a drainage ditch, for now, waiting for the rain that would reach it by morning. The next 2 days moved with the specific momentum of a work site that has a problem at its center, and everyone focused on resolving it. Tuesday brought the materials confirmation. Wednesday brought the inspector's pre-clearance call, which George handled with brief professional efficiency. Marcus reviewed the report plan twice, confirmed the temperature forecast for Thursday morning, and spent the better part of Wednesday evening going through the crew rotation by hand at the kitchen table after Caleb had gone to bed. He ate a late dinner standing at the counter, because sitting at the table alone with the second place setting empty felt, on certain evenings, like something he preferred not to do. Thursday morning came in cold and clear-skied, with the particular hard cold of November in Cedar Falls that settled into the ground and stayed there. The repour went without incident. Kevin supervised the batch mixing personally. The new handoff protocol was followed to the letter, and Dale walked both shift changes through it himself, just to be certain. By 4 o'clock, the new section was in, and curing, and the crew was cleaning up. And Dale came to the site office doorway at 4:30, and told Marcus he could go home at a reasonable hour for once. Marcus had paperwork. He stayed until 7:15. He was finishing the last page of a subcontractor invoice review when he noticed the window. The weather app had promised clear skies through the evening. The window was showing something entirely different. The western sky had gone a deep, bruised purple that had not been there an hour ago. The specific shade that Cedar Falls residents recognized as the kind of sky that was not asking whether it was going to rain, only how hard. He packed up and went to his truck. The first drops hit the windshield before he reached the gate. By the time he was on Ridgeback Lane heading south, the drops had made their decision and become something more committed. The wipers worked at full speed. Both gutters along Ridgeback were running with shallow water, and the other drivers on the road had slowed without being asked, the way drivers do when the rain has become the loudest thing around them. Marcus took Hollow Creek Road. He always took Hollow Creek Road when Cedar Valley was backed up in bad weather, and on nights like this one, Cedar Valley would be a parking lot. Hollow Creek ran alongside a drainage channel that filled in heavy rain, and the road was narrow and unlighted in sections. But it was 20 minutes faster when the main road was congested, and Marcus had driven it hundreds of times without incident. He was about a mile down Hollow Creek when his headlights caught something at the right edge of the road. A box. Cardboard. Sitting at the lip of the drainage ditch, its sides already darkened and softening with rain. He was past it in less than a second, the headlights moving on, the box already behind him. His brain registered the shape, too deliberate, too specific, too much the particular shape of something that had been placed there rather than blown there. And then his foot came off the gas. He drove another 40 feet. He stopped. He sat with the truck idling, and the rain thundering on the roof, and the wipers working hard, and he had a brief, entirely reasonable internal argument with himself. It was a box in a ditch in the rain on a back road in November, and it was probably nothing. It was probably some packaging that had fallen off a truck. He was tired. He was later than he should be. And getting out of the truck to investigate a piece of cardboard in a drainage ditch was not a rational use of his time or his dry clothes. He put the truck in reverse. He was back at the box in 10 seconds. He got out without putting his hood up because there was no time to think about hoods. The rain was cold and immediate, and soaked his shoulders before he had taken 5 steps, and he reached the ditch in 3 strides and crouched down and looked at the box. It moved. Not much. A single, barely there shift of the cardboard wall, the kind of movement that happens when something inside is trying, but does not have much strength left to try with. Marcus pulled back the top flap, which was already half dissolved, and looked at what was inside. 4 puppies, golden-colored and soft-furred, small enough that he could have cupped 2 of them in each hand. 5 or 6 weeks old, he would have guessed, though he had no particular frame of reference for that. They were nestled in newspaper that had long since stopped providing any comfort, and the newspaper was soaked, and 3 of the 4 puppies were completely still, in a way that made his stomach tighten, because it was the stillness of things that had run out of time. But the 4th one was in the corner farthest from the water seeping through the box's base. And the 4th one moved. More than the box had moved a second ago. The 4th one moved with purpose, pressing against the far corner, and its small head turned toward the opening Marcus had made, toward the light, toward anything that was different from what had been there before. Marcus did not think. Thinking would have taken time he did not have. He reached into the box with both hands and lifted the animal out, and pressed it against his shirt inside his jacket, and held the jacket closed over it with one hand, and ran back to the truck. He sat behind the wheel with the engine running, and the heater pointed at his chest, and the puppy pressed against him, and he used his free hand to search for the nearest emergency animal clinic. Garland Street, 1.8 miles. He had never been there. He had no reason to have been there before tonight. He pulled out onto Hollow Creek Road and drove. The puppy against his chest was the weight of almost nothing. It was wet and shaking, and its warmth was the shaking kind, not the healthy kind. And every 30 seconds or so, Marcus felt the slight press of it breathing against his ribs, which was not much, but was the only thing that mattered. He talked to it. He was aware that he was talking to an animal, and that this was not something he had ever done before, and that he did not know what to say to an animal, and he said it anyway. because the silence in the truck felt like a bad option. "Stay," he said. The word came out before he chose it. "Come on, stay with it." The animal clinic on Garland Street had a lit sign and an open door, and two people at the front desk, who both stood up the moment Marcus came through it, because a large man in a soaked jacket, carrying something pressed against his chest, and moving with that particular urgent purpose, was not a person you made wait. "Emergency," Marcus said. "Puppy. Found in the drainage ditch on Hollow Creek Road. There were 4. 3 didn't make it. This one is hypothermic." The vet tech, whose name tag said Robin, came around the counter with her hands already out, and an expression that had shifted in an instant, from receptionist to professional. She took the puppy from Marcus's jacket, with the practiced steadiness of someone who had done this before, and knew exactly what she was going to do next. She went through the door at the back. "Come through," she said without turning around. In the examination room, a second vet tech named Carl appeared from a side door, and joined Robin at the table. They worked quickly and quietly, and with the fluid efficiency of two people who had coordinated in exactly this kind of situation before. Marcus stood near the door, with his wet jacket dripping on the floor and his hands empty, which felt strange. 5 to 6 weeks, Carl said, checking the puppy with trained hands. Golden Retriever mix. Temperature is low. Breathing is shallow but present. "What are the chances?" Marcus asked. Robin glanced at him. Not quickly, not dismissively. She looked at him with the direct, clear-eyed honesty of someone who believes that people deserve real information, rather than managed reassurance. "Better now than they would have been if you'd waited another 15 minutes, she said. "We'll have a better picture in an hour. Go to the waiting room, and we'll update you." Marcus went to the waiting room. He sat in a plastic chair, and put his elbows on his knees, and his hands over his face, and breathed for a moment. His jacket was leaving a damp outline on the chair. He did not care. He took out his phone and called Caleb. 4 rings, then Caleb's voice, flat with the distraction of someone pulled out of something they were focused on. "Hey. I'm going to be late," Marcus said. "I found an animal on the way home. I'm at the vet clinic on Garland Street." A pause. An animal. A puppy. It was in a cardboard box in the drainage ditch on Hollow Creek Road in the rain. 3 of them were already gone. 1 made it. A longer pause. Then, quietly and without any of the flatness from before. "Is it going to be okay?" "I don't know yet. There's food in the refrigerator. Don't wait up." "Okay." A beat. "Marcus." "Yeah. Was it bad? When you found it?" Marcus looked at the wall across from him. The plain, institutional beige of a waiting room wall, exactly like every other waiting room wall he had ever sat in front of. "Yes," he said. "It was bad." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said softly. "Let me know how it goes." Marcus put his phone in his pocket and sat in the plastic chair and waited. A man came out of one of the examination rooms sometime around 9. He was older, with a gray cardigan and the slow, careful movement of someone who was managing a long and tiring evening with a great deal of quiet dignity. He had a cat carrier in one hand. He sat 2 chairs away from Marcus and set the carrier on his knees and looked through the mesh at the small gray cat inside it. "Kidneys," the man said, without preamble, as if they had already been in conversation. "She goes through these episodes. They put her on fluids and she comes back. We've been doing this for 2 years. Marcus looked at the carrier. The cat inside was completely still, breathing slowly, watching the room with the calm patience of an animal that had learned that waiting rooms eventually ended. "How old is she?" Marcus asked. 14 years, the man said. His voice had the settled quality of someone who had lived with this a long time and was no longer surprised by it. "Her name is Penny. She looks calm. She's always calm. Even when things are at their worst." He looked at Marcus, with the easy attention of someone who has spent many evenings in waiting rooms and has stopped finding it strange to talk to strangers in them. "You came in with the puppy?" "Yes. Hollow Creek Road." "I heard Robin mention it." He looked at the carrier. "You went back for it." Marcus looked at him. "I almost didn't," he said. He hadn't intended to say that. It came out the way things come out, when you're tired, and the hour is late, and the room is quiet. The man nodded slowly. "But you did," he said simply, as if that was the whole story, as if that was the only part that needed saying. "Gerald," the man said, offering his hand. Marcus. They shook. I've found, Gerald said, settling back in his chair, with the deliberateness of someone who is not going anywhere fast, and has made peace with that the things we almost decide not to do are often the things we're most grateful for afterward. The door you almost don't open, the road you almost don't take back. He looked at his cat. Penny almost wasn't mine. The shelter had a younger one, very healthy, very straightforward. They recommended her. I almost took the recommendation. He reached one finger through the mesh and let the cat press her head against it. 14 years. She was there for my wife's illness. She was there for the recovery. She was there for the years after, the quiet ones. He paused. The younger cat would have been fine, but she would not have been Penny. Marcus sat with this. Robin came out at 11:20 with an update. Temperature rising. Fluid intake starting. Breathing had improved. Gerald's wife arrived at 10 past 10 and collected him gently, the way people who have been married a long time collect each other, efficiently and with affection. Gerald stood, picked up the carrier, and looked at Marcus. I hope your puppy does well, he said. I hope Penny does too, Marcus said. Gerald nodded, and they were gone. Marcus sat alone in the waiting room. The rain continued outside. The fluorescent light above him was doing the thing fluorescent lights do in the small hours, humming slightly, making the room feel slightly too bright for the time. He was the only person in the waiting room, and the building around him was alive with its quiet, particular work, and he sat in the plastic chair and let his mind go where it went when he stopped managing it. He thought about Elaine. Not the 2-second version, not the framed photograph on the corner of his desk. The full, unmanaged, unapologetic reality of her. The way she had come into every room she ever walked into and immediately changed the quality of it. The way she had of putting her hand on the back of someone's chair when she was standing near them and they were sad, not saying anything, just making contact, because she understood that sometimes presence was the entire point. He thought about February, the night the phone rang with an unknown number. The way his body had known before his mind caught up. The drive to Cedar Falls General through a night that was gray and ordinary, outside the window of his truck, the city going about its business, the traffic lights cycling through their colors, the world continuing, as if nothing had happened yet, because for everyone else it hadn't. She had been gone before he arrived. They had told him in a small room off the main corridor, 2 people with careful faces and even practiced voices, and he had nodded and said thank you and asked what the next steps were, because next steps were something he knew how to handle, because next steps were the only thing between him and the alternative, which was stopping, and stopping was not a thing he could afford to do. He had not cried that night. He had not cried in the weeks that followed, through the arrangements and the service, and the months of Caleb eating dinner alone upstairs, while Marcus ate it downstairs. He had moved. He had kept everything running. He had decided that the only way through was straight through, without slowing down, and he had been doing it ever since. He sat in the waiting room and let himself feel the weight of how long that had been going on. Robin came out at 11:50. He's stable, she said. Temperature is back in a safe range. He took some formula and kept it down. He's sleeping. She looked at Marcus with the assessment of someone who had been watching the man in the waiting room for several hours. Dr. Grant comes in at 8. If you want to wait and speak with her about what comes next, what he's going to need, whether you're planning to take him home, she'll be able to walk you through everything. I'll be here, Marcus said. Robin left and came back 3 minutes later with a folded blanket. She set it on the chair beside him. She did not say anything about it, and neither did Marcus. He covered his jacket with the blanket and sat in the plastic chair, and the building hummed quietly around him, and the rain on the windows was a steady, constant sound, and sometime around 4 in the morning, with his head against the wall and the blanket pulled close, Marcus Everett fell asleep. He slept without dreaming. He slept the way people sleep when they are exhausted past the point of anything but sleep. A deep, simple, uncomplicated rest. When he woke at 7, there was gray November morning light coming through the front window of the clinic. A different vet tech was at the desk, someone he hadn't seen before. The rain had stopped. The street outside was wet and shining and entirely still. And somewhere behind the door at the back of the clinic, a small animal was breathing steadily, gathering strength, preparing, in the animal way of things that have decided to continue, for whatever came next. Marcus sat up. He folded the blanket. He went to the desk and asked for a cup of coffee if there was one, and when the vet tech brought it to him, he wrapped both hands around it and looked at the light coming through the window and understood, without being able to explain it precisely, that he was not going to leave before he knew what came next. Dr. Nora Grant arrived at 7:55. Robin introduced her with the brevity of someone who trusted the facts to speak for themselves. "He's been here since last night," which told Dr. Grant, in 5 words, everything she needed to know about the man standing up from the plastic chair, with a folded blanket tucked under his arm, and a coffee cup in his hand, and the slightly hollow look of someone who had not slept in a real bed. She was 34, with light brown hair pulled back and the kind of focused, settled presence that people develop when they have spent years in rooms where things can change fast, and staying calm is not optional. She looked at Marcus for 2 seconds with the efficient, non-intrusive assessment of someone who reads situations quickly and then acts on what she reads. "You're here for the golden mix," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Come through." She walked into the back room, where the puppy was in a small, warmed incubator, curled against the far corner of it, the way young animals curl when they are putting every resource they have into recovery, rather than movement. The color had improved overnight. The breathing was steady and even. Dr. Grant checked the monitor readings with the careful thoroughness of someone who does something 1,000 times and still does it with the same attention each time, because the 1,000th time is just as important as the first. "He's doing well," she said. She looked at the puppy the way Marcus had noticed that good veterinarians looked at animals. Not clinically, not distantly, but with the specific warmth of someone who chose this work because the animals mattered to them. "Better than I would have predicted when he came in. His temperature is stable, he kept the overnight formula, and his lungs are clear." She paused. "He's a strong little guy. Whatever he ran up against before you found him, he decided he wasn't done." "Any lasting effects?" Marcus asked. "From the cold?" "Unlikely, given how quickly he got here, and how his systems have responded." She looked at Marcus. "You drove fast." "I drove the speed I needed to drive," he said. Something close to a smile crossed her face, brief and real. "Have you had animals before?" "No." "Do you have any experience with bottle feeding?" "No." She nodded. Not with judgment, but with the practical assessment of a professional, identifying what information is required. "The most important thing is the schedule," she said. "Every 2 to 3 hours, without exception, day and night. He cannot feed himself. He cannot regulate his own body temperature. He cannot do any of the things that will keep him alive without consistent help from outside himself. The schedule is not a guideline. It is what keeps him going." She looked at him directly. "Can you commit to that?" "Yes," Marcus said. She studied him for a moment. People often said yes quickly, and then found out what yes actually meant in practice. But there was something about this man, the way he had sat in her waiting room all night, the way he answered questions without hedging, that told her his yes meant what it said. "I'd like to keep him until early afternoon," she said. "Let him build a bit more strength on our equipment before the transition. Come back at 2. "I'll come at 2, he said. He left the clinic at 8:15, drove to the Cranford site, and was at his desk by 9. Dale came in at 9:15 and looked at Marcus with the expression of a man who had many questions and was actively choosing not to ask them, which was one of the things Marcus appreciated most about Dale. "Post-report inspection, confirmed for next Tuesday," Dale said, setting the schedule update on the desk. "Good. Any issues with the curing overnight?" "None. Temperature held and the section looks excellent." "All right." Marcus looked at the schedule. "I need to leave by 1:30 today." Dale blinked. 1:30. "Yes. That's..." Dale visibly stopped himself. "Fine, noted." Marcus worked through the morning with the particular focused efficiency of a man who has a deadline. He reviewed 3 subcontractor bids, confirmed the following week's materials delivery, called the client with the post-report inspection update, and handled 7 emails before noon. At 1:15 he was in his truck. He was at the clinic on Garland Street by 1:45, which gave him 15 minutes to sit in the parking lot and think clearly about what he was doing. He had spent the morning not thinking about it, which was his usual approach to things he had already decided. He had decided in the waiting room at 4 in the morning, without deliberating, the way he had made the decision to reverse the truck on Hollow Creek Road. His body had already chosen and his mind had simply accepted it. He was taking the dog home. Dr. Grant had the puppy ready in a small lined box at 2 exactly, which Marcus noted and respected. She went through the care instructions at the reception desk with the thoroughness of someone who understood that people in unfamiliar situations retained less than they thought they did. She had printed a sheet. She walked him through the formula ratio. She explained temperature management, warning signs, positioning, what to do at night versus what to do during the day. She gave him her card. "Call at any hour," she said, "not just clinic hours." Marcus looked at the card. He looked at the puppy in the box, who had turned his face toward the light coming through the clinic window, his barely open eyes tracking the brightness with the earnest, limited focus of something learning what its senses could do. "What do most people name them?" he asked. "Animals they bring in like this." Dr. Grant looked at the puppy, and then at Marcus. "Lucky," she said, "almost always." Marcus considered this for a moment. "He's not going to be called Lucky," he said. Dr. Grant smiled. "Genuine, unhurried, the real kind." "Good," she said. "He doesn't look like a Lucky." Marcus drove home with the box on the passenger seat and his hand resting on the edge of it at every red light, which was, he observed to himself, not something he had ever done before, and which he did not stop doing. The house on Millbrook Lane was quiet when he pulled in, and Caleb's car was not in the driveway, which meant Caleb was still at school. Marcus carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen counter, and took the first careful look at the animal in proper daylight. 5 or 6 weeks old, Dr. Grant had said. Golden Retriever mix, she had said. Small enough to fit in 2 cupped palms, with the short, impossibly soft fur of very young animals, and eyes that had only recently opened to a world that had, so far, been fairly unkind to him. The puppy looked at Marcus. Not at the room, not at the counter, at Marcus specifically, with whatever focus those newly opened eyes could manage, which was limited but present. Marcus looked back. "All right," he said quietly. "You made it this far." He was setting up the warming area in the kitchen corner, the pad, the towel, the positioned bowl, when he heard the front door, and then Caleb's footsteps in the hallway, and then Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. He had his backpack over one shoulder. He was still wearing his jacket. His eyes went to the box on the counter and stayed there. "That's him," he said, not a question. "Yes," Marcus said. Caleb came to the counter slowly, the way you approach something you want to see clearly and don't want to startle. Marcus moved the front flap of the box so Caleb could see in without the puppy being disturbed. Caleb bent forward and looked. The puppy, picking up on the new presence the way young animals do, turned its face upward. Caleb was still, and then the puppy's nose moved, taking in the new scent, and he pressed toward the warmth above him. Caleb made a sound that was barely a sound, involuntary, quiet, the sound of someone encountering something unexpectedly moving. He reached one finger in with the careful delicacy of someone handling something irreplaceable. The puppy found the finger with his nose and pressed against it. "He's so small," Caleb said. His voice had dropped to the specific register people use around sleeping babies and newly born things. "He's going to get bigger," Marcus said, significantly. Caleb straightened up and looked at Marcus, and for a moment, for one clear, unhesitating moment, the careful distance between them dissolved completely, and Caleb's face showed what it actually felt. Not the managed 17-year-old version, not the behind-a-closed-door version, but the full one. Moved, open, present. "Is he going to be okay?" Caleb asked. "The vet thinks so," Marcus said. "But we have to do the work. Feeding every 2 or 3 hours. Temperature management. He can't regulate any of it on his own yet." Caleb looked at the puppy, then at Marcus. "So we do it. If you're willing to help." There was a brief flash of something across Caleb's face. The slight, dignified offense of a teenager who has just been asked whether they're willing to do something they had already entirely committed to doing. "Of course I'm willing," Caleb said. "Then we do it," Marcus said. They stood on opposite sides of the counter and looked at the small animal between them, and the kitchen was quiet around them in a way it had not been quiet in a long time. Not the empty quiet, not the managed quiet of 2 people being careful around each other, but the full quiet of 2 people looking at the same thing and feeling the same about it. "What's his name?" Caleb asked. We haven't discussed it, Marcus said. I think bear. Marcus looked at the puppy. He's not a bear. He will be, in a few months. You name an animal for what it is, not what you project onto it. Caleb looked at Marcus with the expression of someone encountering an argument they find simultaneously frustrating and unexpectedly interesting. That's a strange principle for naming a dog. It's a practical principle. Bear is also practical, descriptive even. We'll discuss it, Marcus said, which meant the discussion had begun and was not over. That evening they did the first feeding together, Marcus holding the puppy in the crook of his arm, while Caleb held the bottle at the angle Dr. Grant had specified on the printed sheet, which Caleb had read twice before Marcus got home, and which he now referenced with the attentiveness of someone who understood that the instructions were not suggestions. They ate dinner late, standing at the kitchen counter because the table had the puppy's setup on it, and they ate it together, which was different from their usual arrangement, and nobody pointed this out, but both of them felt it. They talked about the feeding schedule. They talked about the temperature guidelines. Caleb asked 3 questions about what Dr. Grant had said, and Marcus answered them accurately, and Caleb nodded and added notes to the printed sheet in the margins, which made Marcus think of Elaine, who had done the same thing to every document that passed through her hands, annotated it, improved it, made it fully hers. He did not say this, but he thought it. After dinner, Caleb settled the puppy in his warmed corner and stood over him for a moment watching him sleep, and Marcus watched Caleb watching the puppy and understood that something had shifted. Not in the dramatic way that shifts in stories sometimes happened, in the real way, which was small and specific, and more durable for being small and specific. At 10 o'clock, Caleb said goodnight and went upstairs. Marcus set his phone alarm for midnight. He sat in the kitchen for a while in the quiet, the range light on, the puppy in his corner breathing evenly, and the house around him felt, not different exactly, not transformed, just inhabited in a way it had not quite been before. Like something was happening in it. Like something had begun. The naming argument ran for 4 days. This was, in itself, something remarkable, because Marcus and Caleb had not disagreed about anything out loud for a long time. Disagreement required engagement, and engagement required presence, and what they had been managing between them for the past 2 years was a kind of careful parallel existence, 2 people sharing a house and a grief, and handling both separately, which is one of the ways you can survive losing someone, and not the most useful one in the long run. But the puppy, still unnamed, still the subject of active debate, had created a topic that both of them had opinions about, and opinions required expressing, and expressing required talking, and talking had a way of finding its own momentum once it started. Caleb wanted bear. He argued for it consistently and with more rhetorical structure than Marcus had expected, citing the animal's size trajectory, temperament indicators, and the general principle that a name should reflect the animal's eventual full self rather than its temporary infant state. Marcus said bear was the choice of someone who had run out of imagination before they'd properly started. Caleb said that was an extraordinary position from someone who had not yet produced a single counter-suggestion. Marcus said he was still considering. Caleb said considering was not a name. They went back and forth like this, across dinner, and across mornings, and across the 2 in the morning feeding handoffs that had already become a routine. Marcus handling midnight and 2. Caleb coming down voluntarily at 4, and handling the pre-dawn one before school. Neither of them having formally agreed to this split, but both of them having arrived at it without discussion, because it was simply what made sense. The first few nights were brutal in the specific way that sleep deprivation is brutal. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but with the slow accumulation of hours that were supposed to be rest, and instead were feedings and temperature checks, and the low, patient work of keeping something small and fragile on the right side of the line. Marcus moved through the workdays of that first week, with the careful efficiency of a man managing his reserves. Dale noticed. Kevin noticed. Pete, the youngest member of the crew, made the mistake of commenting that Marcus looked tired at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, and Marcus told him to get to the north wall for the post-report inspection walkthrough, and Pete went to the north wall with the specific speed of a person who understands that they have misread the room. Dale said nothing, which was the correct reading of the room. It was on the 3rd night that the most important conversation happened. Marcus was in the kitchen at 2:15, standing at the counter with the puppy held in the crook of his left arm, and the small bottle angled in his right hand. He had the range light on, because full overhead light at 2 in the morning felt wrong in a way he could not have specifically justified, but did not need to justify. The house was completely quiet. The street outside was dark and still. Then he heard the stairs. Slow at first, then the hallway. Then Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway in his hoodie and socks. His hair pressed flat on one side from the pillow, his eyes carrying the specific alert quality of someone who has woken from something and not gone back. "Did he wake you?" Marcus asked quietly. "No," Caleb said. "I woke up and thought about him, and then I couldn't stop thinking about him." He came to the counter and stood beside Marcus and looked at the puppy, who was eating with the focused, wholehearted commitment of something that had been hungry and was now not, and intended to remain that way for as long as possible. "He's eating better," Caleb said. "Better every time," Marcus said. "The vet said by week 2 he should be able to go longer between feeds." "Good." Caleb looked at the counter for a moment. Then he said, "I used to come down in the middle of the night when I was little. You remember?" Marcus looked at him. "Mom would be up," Caleb said. "She stayed up late, always, reading or just sitting. I'd come down when I couldn't sleep, and she'd make room for me, and we'd sit in the kitchen." He paused. "She always made tea." She said tea at 2 in the morning was one of the few actually reasonable things you could do at 2 in the morning. "I didn't know that," Marcus said. "She told me not to wake you. She said you needed the sleep, that you carried a lot during the day, and the sleep was important." Caleb looked at the puppy. "She was always protecting your sleep." Marcus held the animal steady and let the silence sit for a moment. Outside, nothing moved. The oak trees were still. The street was empty. The kitchen felt very small and very full at the same time. "She was right," Marcus said finally. "I did need it." "Yeah." Caleb watched the puppy finish eating and press his face against Marcus's arm. "Do you think about her?" he asked, carefully, not looking at Marcus, looking at the animal. "In the night? When it's quiet like this?" Marcus looked at his son, 17 years old, standing in the kitchen at 2:15 in the morning, because he couldn't stop thinking about a puppy, asking his father a question he had been holding for a very long time, and had finally found a moment to set down. "Yes," Marcus said. "I do." Caleb nodded. He didn't push further, didn't ask what Marcus thought about when he thought about her, or how often, or in what particular way. He just received the yes, and stood with it, and Marcus understood that the yes was what the question had actually been looking for. Caleb stayed another 10 minutes. He watched Marcus settle the puppy back into his warm corner, watched the small animal curl and settle and close his eyes. Then he said goodnight and went back upstairs. Marcus stood in the kitchen alone and felt something move in the house. Not literally, not dramatically, but something that had been held in one position for a long time had shifted an inch, and he was aware of it in the specific way you are aware of changes in the structures of things you understand very well. The name came on a Sunday. 4 days into the debate, 4 days into the new schedule, Marcus was in the backyard in the thin November afternoon, with the puppy in a towel on his lap. Dr. Grant had recommended brief, controlled outdoor exposure. Not cold enough to stress him, just enough to begin building his thermoregulation capacity. The backyard was bare and quiet, the oak tree in the corner standing patient and still. The sky, the particular flat gray of a Cedar Falls November that was not threatening anything, just being honest about itself. The puppy was awake, more awake than Marcus had seen him. His eyes were opening further, daily, not the vague, barely there opening of the first days, but a proper opening, an attempt at actual focus. He turned his head toward the sky, toward the tree, toward the man holding him, in the sequence of a creature building its first real inventory of the world. Then he looked at Marcus, directly, not in the general upward direction, at Marcus, at his face, with both eyes focused and present for the first time. The small head turned toward the sound of Marcus's breathing, and then adjusted until it found the face that went with it. Marcus went completely still. "Scout," he said. He did not know where it came from. It arrived the way some things arrive when you stop reaching for them. The back door opened. Caleb came out with a cup of tea, saw his father sitting motionless in the yard, with the puppy on his lap, and a look on his face he had not seen before. "Did you just name him?" Caleb said. "Scout," Marcus said again, testing it a second time. Caleb stood on the back step, He said the name quietly to himself, looking at the animal on Marcus's lap. Then he sat down and thought about it for a full 15 seconds, which was Caleb's equivalent of careful deliberation. "That's right," he said. "That's actually completely right." Marcus looked at the puppy. The puppy looked at Marcus with his new, focused, fully open eyes, entirely calm, as if he had known his name was on its way and had simply been waiting for the people involved to locate it. They went inside, and that evening Caleb fed Scout his bottle, while Marcus made dinner for both of them, and the kitchen was full of the ordinary comfortable noise of people doing things in the same room for the same reason, and a page had turned without ceremony, and what came after it was already beginning. Scout grew the way puppies grow, which is to say with complete disregard for anyone's schedule, preferences, emotional readiness, or personal property. The chewing began in week 3. It started with the television remote, which Scout got hold of on a Saturday morning, while Marcus was on the phone going over material specifications. He came back into the living room to find Scout on the rug, looking deeply satisfied, and the remote in 3 distinct pieces arranged around him, as if he had been considering them from multiple angles. Marcus stood in the doorway. "Scout," he said. Scout's tail moved in a small, certain circle. The concept that his name might be arriving in a context of correction was, at this stage of his development, entirely beyond him. Marcus looked at the remote. He looked at Scout. He picked up the pieces and ordered a replacement and went back to his phone call. He did not raise his voice. He did not put Scout outside. He did not react to the situation with any of the frustration that it objectively warranted, which was, as Dale later said when he heard about it, the first concrete evidence that Marcus Everett was becoming a different version of himself. The remote was followed by the left work boot, specifically and only the left one, which Marcus found philosophically baffling, in addition to inconvenient. Then a corner of the kitchen rug. Then the library book Caleb had left on the couch, which Caleb received with a philosophical acceptance that surprised Marcus, until Marcus realized it was less about the book and more about the fact that Scout had chosen Caleb's couch cushion as the location, which Caleb appeared to regard as a kind of endorsement. "He's going through a phase," Caleb said. "He is methodically dismantling this household, one object at a time," Marcus said. "That's what puppies do. They're learning through contact. Every object teaches them something about the world. The world would prefer to remain intact while being studied." Caleb looked at Scout, who was currently attempting to drag a throw pillow across the living room floor by one corner, his back legs working hard, his expression one of absolute commitment. "He's ambitious, though," Caleb said, with the unconcealed affection of someone who has already lost the argument, even though they hadn't said anything that counted as losing. "He is," Marcus said, "against his will." What Marcus did not say, because he was not built for saying things like this, and because naming it might have required him to examine it, and examining it would have required him to admit how much had changed, was that coming home to the chewed boot, and the demolished remote, and the ongoing pillow situation, was the opposite of how it logically should have felt. Disruption was disruption. An unplanned dependent who operated on a schedule of his own invention was objectively inconvenient. The house had been running smoothly, in its quiet and organized way, for 3 years, and Scout had upended the rhythm of it from the first night. But the house, now, felt inhabited. It felt like a place where things happened, where the floor had paw prints on it, and someone's shoes needed to be put up high, and the couch was no longer entirely reliable. It felt the way houses feel, when they are being lived in fully, rather than maintained carefully. Marcus noticed this. He filed it under practical and left it there. He noticed other changes too. Caleb's bedroom door, which had been reliably closed for most of 2 years, was now frequently open. Scout had discovered that a nose applied to the base of a door with sufficient persistence produced results, and Caleb had stopped closing the door fully, because Scout sitting outside it, and producing his specific between a whine and a grievance sound, was audible through the walls, and had a staying power that outlasted any determination to ignore it. Marcus heard them in there, Caleb's voice doing the low, easy, one-sided conversation people have with animals that are listening. He heard Caleb laugh once, a real laugh, the kind that arrived without being invited and did not manage itself. It was Elaine's laugh. The same pitch, the same sudden arrival, the same quality of being completely genuine. Marcus stopped in the hallway and stood still and listened to it until it faded, and then he continued to the kitchen and made coffee, and did not let himself stand there looking at the wall. But he had heard it, and it was still there, somewhere, that laugh. Still in the house. Scout changed things room by room without knowing he was doing it. There was a water bowl on the kitchen floor, and a chew toy in the living room corner, and muddy paw prints on the back door, that Marcus wiped every Thursday evening. There was a living thing moving through the house, following people from room to room, lying in doorways, pressing himself against feet, appearing at bedtime to check that everyone was accounted for. The house breathed differently with a dog in it. It was on a Wednesday evening in week 6 that Marcus came home and found something that stopped him in the kitchen doorway. Scout was in his corner. This was where Scout was meant to be, but Scout's corner had changed. Draped across the warming pad, partially under Scout, was something pale blue and familiar that should not have been there, should not have been anywhere in that kitchen, should have been on the high shelf in the master bedroom closet, where Marcus had put it 3 years ago and had not touched since, because touching it was not something he had found a way to do. Pale blue, with small buttons, the kind of substantial, soft cardigan she had worn in the evenings, reading, watching television, sitting at the kitchen table with her 9 o'clock tea. After the accident, Marcus had folded it carefully and placed it on the high shelf in the closet. Not thrown away, not anywhere he could easily see it, just placed beyond the range of ordinary contact, on the shelf where things went when you were not ready to let go, and were also not ready to keep looking at them. Scout had it. He was asleep on it. His nose was pressed directly into the fabric, his small chest rising and falling against the pale blue knit. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time. He went to the bedroom and looked at the closet. The door was slightly ajar. He must have left it that morning. On the floor, a scarf had fallen. Some folded sweaters had been moved. Scout had gone in, had climbed, had fallen and climbed again, had investigated the shelf with the patience and determination that puppies apply to things they have decided they need, and he had found the one thing up there that smelled different from everything else. Because it was the one thing that had been worn, repeatedly, against the skin of a specific person. It carried the specific, irreplaceable scent of someone who was gone, and Scout had brought it down. Marcus stood in the bedroom and looked at the disturbed closet. Then he went back to the kitchen and crouched down beside Scout. The puppy was sleeping deeply, the full, uncomplicated sleep of an animal that has found the exact right place and committed to it. His face was pressed into the cardigan fabric with the specific, instinctive certainty of a creature that has identified something important and is not letting go of it. Marcus looked at him for a long time. Then he stood up and left the cardigan exactly where it was. He told himself it was because disturbing a sleeping dog was unnecessary trouble. He told himself the cardigan could be washed later. He told himself whatever sensible, practical explanation presented itself as a reason. But the actual reason, the one he did not examine, was simpler than any of those things. He could not make himself move it. Caleb came downstairs at 8 and passed through the kitchen and saw Scout in the corner, with the pale blue cardigan beneath him. He stopped. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at Marcus. Then he went to the refrigerator and got his glass of water and left the kitchen without saying a word. Because Caleb had recognized the cardigan too, and because both of them were managing this the only way they knew how, which was to leave it exactly as it was and not say anything, and in their shared silence, say everything. Scout slept on the cardigan every night after that. He arranged himself on it with the satisfaction of a creature that has found its correct place in the world. He pressed his nose into the fabric and breathed deeply and slept in the uncomplicated peace of an animal that is not haunted by anything, that simply knows what it loves and goes to it without apology. And Marcus came downstairs every morning and saw the blue cardigan in the corner and said nothing and went on with his morning and did not wash it and did not move it and did not examine why. Something was working in that kitchen, something patient and persistent and entirely beyond the reach of plans or schedules or the particular way Marcus Everett had learned to manage everything. Something was getting ready to break through. It was a Saturday morning when everything broke open. Marcus woke at 5:42 without an alarm, because his body had never agreed to sleep past 6 regardless of what day it was. The house was quiet in the way that Saturday mornings are quiet, a different quality from weekday quiet, softer and without the pull of the schedule ahead. The November light through the curtains was gray and not yet decided. Scout had not made a sound from downstairs, which meant he was still sleeping, and that was the first small mercy of the morning. Marcus got up and went to the bathroom. He washed his face. He stood at the mirror for a moment in the specific, unsentimental way of a man taking stock of himself before the day begins, checking that everything is where it should be, that the face looking back is the face he knows, that the morning is ordinary and manageable. Then he went to the closet. He was reaching for the gray flannel shirt on the left hook, the one he wore on weekend mornings, when his hand stopped. The pale blue cardigan was on the shelf to the right. Not where he had originally kept it. Scout had been carrying it from corner to corner over the past several days, experimenting with locations the way dogs experiment with things they care about, and it had found its way to the middle shelf of the closet, pushed slightly forward, visible in the morning's low light. Marcus looked at it. His hand, which had been reaching for the flannel shirt, moved. He took down the cardigan. He held it for a moment. He looked at it. Then he put it on. It was Elaine's size, which meant it came to his hips on her and hung loose on him, in a way that should have felt wrong and didn't. He did the bottom button. He left the rest. He walked to the bathroom mirror and stood in front of it and looked at himself in the pale blue cardigan, with the particular flatness of a man who is doing something he does not have a name for and is not yet sure whether he can continue doing it. He gripped the edge of the counter with both hands and breathed. The cardigan smelled like cedar from the closet lining, and beneath that the dry warmth of fabric that had been folded for a long time, and beneath that, barely present, almost not there, but there, it smelled like her, like the specific, irreplaceable permanent scent of a person who had worn something close to her skin for many years, the scent that could not be washed out without being lost, the scent that was the only version of her that was still physically present in the house. Marcus held the counter and breathed and did not move. He heard Scout's pause on the stairs. Scout had been using the stairs for 3 weeks and had incorporated this skill immediately into his life in the way that dogs incorporate new capabilities, fully and without restraint. His paws on the tile were a quiet, rhythmic sound that Marcus had come to know as well as his own name. Scout walked into the bathroom and stopped. He looked at Marcus. He sat. He pressed his nose against the cardigan hem, where it fell below Marcus's knee, and he inhaled slowly, deliberately, the way a dog's nose works when it is reading something that requires full attention, the way a dog smells when it has found something that matters. He held still. Marcus did not move. He did not speak. He barely breathed. Scout's nose moved along the cardigan fabric, unhurried, thorough, the specific investigation of an animal that is identifying something it recognizes. And then Scout lifted his head. He looked up at Marcus with both eyes open and focused and clear, and he made a sound. It came from low in his chest, not a bark, not a whine. A low, soft, trembling sound that rose and fell and rose again, the kind of sound a dog makes when it is communicating something specific, not a warning, not a complaint, not hunger, but recognition, connection, something known. In that sound, in the particular shape of it, Marcus heard what could not have been words, but landed with the weight of words. The shape of something like mama. The shape of something like, there you are. The shape of a small animal pressing its face against pale blue fabric, and reaching, with the only language it had, towards something enormous it could not explain. Marcus froze. He stood completely still in the bathroom with his hands on the counter, and Scout pressed against his leg, and the sound filling the small room. And everything inside him went very quiet, and then very loud, and then very still. Scout pressed himself against Marcus's leg with his full body weight, all of him forward, his face buried in the cardigan fabric, and the sound he was making had settled into something continuous, and low, and entirely unguarded, the sound of an animal, that has no complicated feelings about being honest, that goes directly to what it feels and stays there. Marcus's legs bent. He sat down on the bathroom floor. He was not aware of deciding to sit. He was not aware of much, in that moment, except the cold tile and the pale blue fabric and the dog pressing against his side, and then the thing that came up from his chest that he had been keeping organized and contained and put carefully away for 3 years. He cried. He had not cried at the hospital. He had not cried at the funeral. He had not cried in 3 years of November mornings and empty Sunday kitchens and 2 place settings at the table and the photograph in the wooden frame on the corner of his desk. He had moved. He had kept everything running. He had been fine, because fine was the only version of functioning he had allowed himself to access. What happened on the bathroom floor was not fine. What happened was real, and it was large, and it had been waiting with 3 years of patience, and it did not hurry. It came out in the quiet way that grief comes out of people who have held it a very long time. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, and thorough, and entirely unavoidable. He thought about her hands. He thought about the way she stood in the kitchen doorway in the morning, with her coffee, and looked out at the backyard, with the expression of someone who is content simply to exist in the moment she is in. He thought about Gerald the unfortunate turtle, which Caleb had told him about, and which he had not known about, and which meant there were entire rooms of her he had never seen, that were still out there somewhere in the people she had loved. He thought about February, the phone call, the drive, the small room off the hospital corridor, the 2 people with careful faces. He thought about 3 years of keeping everything in its place, and how exhausted he was. Scout stayed pressed against his side for the entire time. He did not investigate the bathroom. He did not get restless, or lose interest, or decide that something elsewhere was more pressing. He stayed exactly where he was, with his solid, warm weight, against Marcus's ribs, and his breathing steady and even, the breathing of an animal that has nowhere else to be, and knows it. The light through the bathroom window changed. The gray became something paler, something that suggested morning arriving, rather than morning waiting. Marcus did not know how long he had been on the floor. A long time. Long enough that his back ached, and the tile had gone cold through his clothes, and his face was wet, and his chest felt, for the first time in 3 years, like it had room in it. Like something had been removed that he had not realized was taking up space. He got up. He went to the sink and ran cold water, and washed his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked the same. The face was the same. But something behind it had changed, the way a room changes after you open the windows. The room is still the same room, still the same walls and floor and furniture, but it is full of different air, and you can breathe in it differently than you could before. He dried his face. He went downstairs. Scout went with him, staying close, checking back every few steps with the attentiveness of a dog who has been with someone through something, and has decided that the job is not quite finished yet. Marcus made coffee. He stood at the kitchen counter with the cup held in both hands, and looked at the backyard through the window. The bare branches of the oak tree were perfectly still in the windless morning. The light was pale and clear. He heard Caleb's alarm go off upstairs. Caleb had not been properly asleep. He had lain awake in his room for a long time, listening to the Saturday morning in the way that teenagers sometimes lie awake, not anxious, just alert in the particular quiet of a morning that hasn't committed to anything yet. He had heard his father go to the bathroom. He had heard, through the floor, a sound he could not name. Not a specific sound, but a quality of the house, the way a house sounds differently when something in it is happening, rather than when nothing is. He had sat up in bed and listened, and decided, without deliberating, not to stay upstairs. He came downstairs in his hoodie and socks, and found Marcus in the armchair in the living room, holding an empty coffee cup with both hands, looking at the front window. The pale blue cardigan was on him. Caleb stopped in the doorway. He looked at the cardigan. He looked at his father's face. He sat down on the end of the couch closest to the armchair, not across the room, not at a safe conversational distance, but close enough that there was no ambiguity about where he was directing his attention. Scout came out of the kitchen and looked at both of them. He lay down on the rug between them, exactly in the middle. Marcus looked at his son. "Hey," Caleb said quietly. "Hey," Marcus said. For a moment the room was still. Scout breathed between them. The morning light came through the curtain in a thin, steady line. "I heard you," Caleb said, not with accusation, not with discomfort, with the specific gentleness of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to happen, and is careful now that it has. Through the floor. "I didn't hear what was happening, just that something was." "Yes," Marcus said. "Is that the first time?" Caleb asked. "Since?" "Yes," Marcus said. "First time." Caleb looked at the cardigan. "I recognized it when Scout brought it down from the closet," he said. "I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say." "Neither did I." "I didn't want to make it harder," Caleb said. "I thought if I said something it would." He stopped. He pressed his mouth together the way Elaine had done when she was choosing her words. "I thought if either of us named it, it would get worse." "I thought the same thing," Marcus said. We were both wrong, Caleb said. Marcus looked at his son. At this 17-year-old who had his mother's eyes and her way of going still when something needed to be said carefully. Who had been alone in his room with his grief for 2 years, while Marcus had been alone at work with his, both of them in the same house, both managing the same absence, neither of them finding a way across the distance to the other. I put everything in a place, Marcus said. After. I found a place for all of it, and I kept it there. And I kept moving, because I didn't know what else to do. And I think... He paused. The words were unfamiliar in his mouth. They fit, but he was not used to the fit. I think it was wrong. I think keeping moving was the only thing I knew how to do, and I did it past the point where it was useful. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I used my room, he said. Same thing. Different method. Just closer to the bed. He looked at Scout. It's a little embarrassing that a dog is better at this than both of us. Something shifted in Marcus's chest. Almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. He had an advantage, he said. He didn't know the rules. Yeah. Caleb smiled. The real one. The one that came from somewhere specific and was not managed at all. That's kind of the advantage of being a dog. They sat for a moment in the quiet that was not the old quiet, not the careful managed quiet of two people being considerate around each other's pain. This was something fuller, something that had room in it. She would call me every morning on my way to school, Caleb said. Did you know that? Marcus looked at him. Every morning, until I was 14. She'd call right when I was walking out the door, and she'd give me an update on a made-up turtle, named Gerald the Unfortunate Turtle. His voice had warmth in it, the kind of warmth that comes from remembering something that made you happy, and still does. He was always in some completely absurd situation. She'd give me the latest. Gerald signed up for a pottery class, and immediately broke both hands. He's fine. He's reconsidering. Marcus stared at him. For 4 years. She had an inexhaustible supply of Gerald material. I never once knew where it came from. Marcus thought about Elaine on the phone in a different room so he wouldn't hear, inventing the ongoing, ridiculous misadventures of a fictional turtle, so that their son would walk into school every morning with a laugh that he'd made himself forget about. I didn't know about Gerald, he said. There's probably a lot you don't know, Caleb said honestly, and without any edge in it. She had a drawer that was just for me. I think she had one that was just for you too. That was how she worked. She gave different parts of herself to different people, all of them real. Marcus looked at the window. Outside, the bare oak trees stood in the morning light. He thought about how long he had been managing a person in his head who was smaller than she had actually been, because managing grief meant reducing what you were grieving, making it fit the container you were prepared to keep it in. She thought you were the most capable person she'd ever met, Caleb said. She told me that more than once. She said you were the only person she knew who stopped and thought before acting, even when it cost you. Marcus did not say anything. She'd like Scout, Caleb said. His voice had changed slightly, softer now, with the specific texture of someone talking about the future of someone who is no longer here to be in it. She would have completely taken over, Marcus said. Caleb laughed. Fully, instantly, the laugh that sounded like Elaine's. She would have had him in a training class by week 1. She would have had an Instagram page for him. She would have... He shook his head, still laughing. She would have had a whole organized binder about golden retriever nutrition. Of course she would have, Marcus said. She'd be happy about this, Caleb said. The laughter had settled into something quieter. About us sitting here. About talking. She'd be so happy. Yes, Marcus said. She would. The morning went around them. Scout slept between them on the rug. Neither of them reached for a phone or looked at the time. At some point, Caleb said he was thinking about pizza for lunch, and Marcus pointed out it was 8:45 in the morning, and Caleb said he was thinking ahead, and Marcus said that was reasonable. They ordered at noon. Half and half, the same order that had always been the three of them order. They sat on the living room floor because Caleb said the couch was too formal for pizza, and Marcus found he could not argue with this. Scout sat between them with the bright, interested expression of a dog who understands that where pizza appears, the world has become briefly excellent. They talked through the afternoon, not carefully, not with the managed back and forth of people trying to have a conversation. They just talked, the way people talk when they have stopped being careful with each other, moving from subject to subject without agenda. Caleb talked about his photography project. Marcus talked about the Cranford building beginning to take its real shape. Caleb asked technical questions about the construction. Marcus answered them without simplifying. They talked about Elaine in the specific way, with specific memories. Not the careful, reverential kind of talking people do about the dead, but the real kind, where you remember the funny things, and the annoying things, and the things that made her completely herself. At 4 o'clock, Caleb went to the kitchen and came back with the pale blue cardigan. He walked to the couch and folded it over the back of it, not tucked away, not put back in the closet, just laid there, on the couch, part of the room, available. Marcus looked at it. "Good," he said. That was all, but it was entirely enough. That evening, after Caleb went up to bed and the house settled, Marcus sat alone in the living room, with Scout across his feet, and the blue cardigan on the couch back, and the quiet around him, and the quiet was not the same quiet it had been yesterday, or the day before, or the 3 years before that. It was a quieter that had something in it. He took out his phone. He scrolled to his sister Claire's contact. He looked at her name for a long time. Then he set the phone down on the cushion beside him. Not tonight. Tonight had been enough, and enough was not nothing. Tonight had been, in fact, more than anything this house had held in 3 years. He would call Claire, soon. He would call her and he would have an actual conversation with the person who had known Elaine longest, and who had been waiting with all the patience of someone who loved him enough to wait. But not tonight. Tonight he sat with Scout and the blue cardigan, and the particular warmth of a house that had, in one long and unexpected Saturday, found its way back to something true. Scout's 6-week health check was on a Monday morning, and Marcus had rearranged his work schedule to be at the clinic by 8:30, which was something Dale noted on the calendar, with the neutral expression of a man choosing very carefully not to comment. Marcus drove with Scout in the carrier on the passenger seat, which he had purchased, assembled, and lined with a familiar-smelling towel on the same afternoon he bought it, because Scout was not going to travel in any configuration that felt uncertain to him, and that was simply the position Marcus had arrived at without deciding to. The carrier sat on the seat, and Scout sat inside it, and looked out the mesh window at the moving Cedar Falls streets, with the focused, curious attention of a dog who finds the world genuinely interesting. Dr. Nora Grant was already in the clinic when they arrived. She came to the reception area when she heard Scout's carrier, which was something Marcus had not expected, and she looked at the animal with the warm, efficient recognition of someone who has been thinking about a patient and is glad to see the outcome. "Let's go through," she said. She examined Scout with the careful thoroughness that Marcus had come to associate with her. Weight, temperature, eyes, reflexes, coat condition, joint development. She watched Scout's responses, made notes, checked reference charts for his age bracket, and pronounced him healthy, on track, and ahead of some developmental markers she had expected given his difficult start. "He's strong," she said, looking at Scout sitting on the examination table with the cooperative stillness of a dog who has decided that being examined is an acceptable part of the deal. "What you've been doing has worked." Caleb took the schedule seriously, Marcus said. "Your son." "Yes. He handled the 4 in the morning feeding every day without being asked." Dr. Grant looked at Marcus with the specific attention of someone who reads between lines. "And how are you doing?" she asked. Not with the professional distance of someone asking about the patient, with the genuine directness of someone asking about the person. Marcus looked at Scout on the table. "Something happened," he said. Dr. Grant looked at him and waited, which was the right thing to do. He told her. He told her about the cardigan and how Scout had found it in the closet. He told her about the morning 2 weeks ago, the bathroom mirror, the pale blue fabric, Scout coming in and pressing his nose against it and making that sound. He told her about the bathroom floor and the Saturday afternoon, and Caleb and the pizza and the cardigan on the back of the couch. He did not tell her everything. Some of it belonged only to him and to Caleb, and to a Saturday that had already become one of the most important days of his life. Dr. Grant listened without interrupting. She was very still, which was something Marcus had noticed about her from the beginning. She had the quality of someone who gives a conversation their full attention, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "A dog's sense of smell is something that most people significantly underestimate," she said. We talk about it in multiples, 100 times more sensitive than a human nose, 1,000 times, but those numbers don't really communicate what it means in practice. What it means is that a scent is, for a dog, a complete and specific record. A person's individual scent profile is as unique to a dog as a fingerprint. If Scout encountered that scent in any form during his earliest weeks of life, even secondhand, even through another person or object, the recognition is possible. She looked at Scout, who was looking at a point on the wall with the focused attention of a dog who has heard something interesting in the building's infrastructure. But Scout was found in a box in a ditch, Marcus said. He wasn't with Elaine. He didn't know her. No, Dr. Grant agreed. But we don't know everything about where he was before you found him, or what he encountered in those first 5 or 6 weeks. Scent travels and transfers in ways that are very difficult to trace. She paused. And there is another possibility, which is that the association was formed through you. That what Scout recognized in that cardigan was a scent that was also part of your scent. Something transferred over time through contact. Something that lives in a house for long enough, becomes part of the house's scent, and part of the people in it. Marcus sat with this. The science is interesting, he said slowly. But, Dr. Grant said, but I don't think that's what matters about it. She nodded. No, she said. I don't think it is either. She wrote up Scout's health summary and handed it to Marcus, along with her card. On the back of the card, in a handwriting that was quick and precise, she had written a name and a phone number. That's a grief support group, she said. Monday evenings, Cedar Falls Community Center. I've been recommending them to clients for a couple of years, in situations where I think someone could use the support. I'm not prescribing it, I'm just mentioning it. She looked at Marcus steadily. You're doing well. But doing well alone is harder than it needs to be, and most people who think they're fine doing it alone are actually just getting used to the weight. Marcus looked at the card. He looked at the number on the back. I'll think about it, he said. Dr. Grant nodded in the way of someone who is neither pushing nor doubting. She thanked him for coming in and scratched Scout behind the ear one time, briefly, with the unsentimental affection of a professional who likes animals and does not perform that fact. Marcus loaded Scout into the carrier and walked out to the truck and stood in the parking lot for a minute in the November morning. The sky was overcast and cold, and the parking lot smelled like rain from the night before. Scout was quiet in the carrier, watching the street through the mesh. Marcus looked at the card in his hand. He was not the kind of person who sat in circles and talked about his feelings with strangers. He was Marcus Everett. He solved concrete problems. He reviewed batch records. He called Kevin directly and walked every section of every pour personally. He did not need to sit in a room and process things with other people because he was capable of processing things on his own. He had been capable of processing things on his own for 3 years, and he had been getting it very, very wrong. He put the card in his jacket pocket. He drove to the site. The day was productive. 2 subcontractor meetings, an exterior work assessment, a conversation with the engineering team about the next phase of the residential floors. Marcus moved through all of it with the same competence he always moved through things, but something in the way he carried it was different. He could not have described the difference precisely, but Dale felt it, because at 4 o'clock, Dale came to the site office doorway and said, "You seem less like you're out running something today." Marcus looked at him. "Do I?" "It's a good thing," Dale said, "for what it's worth." Marcus drove home at 6, normal time, not late. He found Caleb in the kitchen making a sandwich. Scout went immediately to Caleb, the way Scout went to Caleb whenever Marcus came through the door, with the complete, uncomplicated joy of an animal greeting someone it loves, all of it visible and none of it performed. Caleb scratched Scout's ears. "How was the checkup?" "Good, healthy. Growing on schedule." "Dr. Grant, think he's going to be big?" 65 to 70 pounds, she said. Caleb looked at Scout. "Ridiculous," he said, with the specific affection of someone who finds something both absurd and wonderful and doesn't see those as contradictions. Marcus hung his jacket. He stood at the counter. He took the card out of his jacket pocket before he set it down and placed it on the counter where he could see it in the morning. Caleb saw it. He didn't say anything about it. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "Yes." Caleb looked at him directly. The directness was Elaine's, that quality of going right to the thing rather than around it. "Are you okay?" Not. Not. I'm fine. Okay. Actually okay. Marcus looked at his son. Nobody had asked him this in 3 years. Nobody had asked it in the specific way that meant they wanted the real answer and would not accept the managed one. Caleb was asking it now, standing in the kitchen holding a sandwich, and the question landed with its full weight. Marcus thought about it for a moment. I'm getting there, he said. Caleb held his gaze for 2 more seconds. Then he nodded. Once. With a satisfaction that was quiet and genuine, and completely certain. The satisfaction of someone who has heard the exact right answer. Okay, he said. He took his sandwich upstairs. Scout watched him go, and then turned to Marcus and looked at him with the expectant steadiness of a dog, waiting to see what comes next. Come on, Marcus said. He made dinner. He ate it. He sat in the living room afterward with Scout across his feet and the card from Dr. Grant on the counter, where he could see it, and he fell asleep by 10 with his head against the armchair, and slept better than he had slept in a long time. The first Monday evening meeting of the support group was in 12 days. He was going to go. Spring came to Cedar Falls the way it always came, in small, specific, undeniable increments. The first sign, in March, was the light, not the temperature. Cedar Falls in early March was still cold enough to need a jacket, but the quality of the light through the kitchen window in the morning. It arrived at a different angle, found different surfaces, stayed longer. Marcus noticed it at 6 in the morning and stood at the counter with his coffee and thought, the light has changed. This was not, historically, the kind of thing he thought about, but he thought about it now. Then the oak trees in the front yard started their first tentative suggestions of green, barely there. Just the faintest swelling at the tips of the bare branches, the beginning of a conversation about coming back. Marcus noticed these too, going to the truck in the morning, which was also not something he had previously given attention to. He was noticing more things. This had been happening since November, incrementally, in the same way the light was changing, not dramatically, not all at once, just more each day than the day before. He called Claire on a Tuesday evening in the second week of March. He had been planning to call her since November, which meant it had taken 4 months, which was, he recognized without much sentiment, a very accurate measure of how slowly he moved toward the things that required him to be genuinely honest with someone who knew him. She answered on the second ring. Marcus, she said, with the warmth and the slight surprise of someone who is glad to hear from you, and does not want to make you feel how surprised they are. Hey, Claire. How are you? She said it gently, in the way that people who love you say things they've been waiting to ask. He thought about how he usually answered this question. Then he answered it differently. I've been better than I've been, he said, and I'm still getting there. Both of those things are true right now. A pause. Then, tell me. He told her. The storm and the road and the box. Scout. The cardigan and the bathroom floor and the Saturday with Caleb. The grief support group, which he had now attended 3 sessions of, and which he was going back to, which was, against every expectation he had carried into that room on the first Monday, something that was genuinely helping him. Claire listened with the specific quality she had always had, which was full and unhurried, and without the need to redirect the conversation to her own response. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I've been so worried about you, she said. I know. Not because I didn't trust you, because I know how you carry things. You carry them perfectly, until the weight changes everything underneath, and you still don't put them down. I know, he said again. How is Caleb? He's better, Marcus said. We're talking, really talking. He's taking photographs, good ones. He's got Elaine's eye. He's got your backbone, Claire said firmly. He's got her eye, and your spine, and that's a combination I will take any day. A pause. You should have called sooner. Yes, he said. But you called now. Yes. Good, that's what matters. They talked for 2 hours, which was the longest Marcus had been on the phone with anyone outside of work in 3 years. He sat in the armchair with Scout across his feet and Caleb's light on upstairs, and he talked to his sister about Elaine, about Caleb, about the company, about what grief support groups were actually like when you went to them, rather than imagining them from the outside. Claire laughed at certain points, and was quiet at others, and told him she was coming to visit in May. Yes, he said, without hedging. After they hung up, he sat in the living room for a while, in the particular quiet of someone who has done something difficult and is sitting with the fact that it was not, in the end, as difficult as they had been making it. I called her, he told Scout, who opened one eye from the middle of the rug. Scout closed the eye again. I know, Marcus said. It took long enough. The grief support group met on Monday evenings at 7 in a room at the Cedar Falls Community Center. The room had a circle of chairs and a table with coffee and whatever someone had brought. In the 3 weeks Marcus had been going, there had been lemon cake, banana bread, and once, from a quiet man named Patrick who was 31 and had lost his brother, a box of exactly the right kind of plain cookies, which Patrick said his brother had always bought, and which he bought now, every Monday, without discussing why. Marcus had sat down in that circle on the first evening, and looked at the 9 other people in it, and thought, very briefly and without pride, that this was not going to be for him. He was Marcus Everett. He did not sit in circles. By the end of the first session, he had spoken for 3 minutes. By the third session, he was speaking for 15, which was, for Marcus, the equivalent of a transformation. He learned things there. He learned from Dorothy, who was 72, and had lost her husband of 48 years, and said, with the frank simplicity of someone who had no use left for indirectness, that the second and third years of grief were harder than the first, because in the first year, the world expects you to be broken, and in the years after, it expects you to be fine, and you are neither. He thought about Dale saying bone-tired. He thought about how long he had been fine. At work, the changes were subtle but real. He was delegating more. Not dramatically, not in a way that compromised the quality of anything, but in the way of a man who has realized that control and competence are not the same thing, and that trusting the people he had spent years building a team with was not weakness, but the correct use of what he had built. He left at 6 more evenings than not. On 2 Fridays he left at 5. Dale said nothing about this, and his face said everything. In the second week of March, Marcus painted the guest room. He did it on a Sunday morning, while Caleb was at Owen's house, which gave him the specific, necessary privacy of doing something that cost more than it looked like from the outside. The room had been the soft green Elaine had chosen, the green she had painted 3 colors before she found the one she wanted, the one that everyone who walked into the room said felt like being outside without being outside. Marcus repainted it a warm yellow, not Elaine's color, not a color he would have chosen in the previous 3 years, a color that looked, when it dried, like early morning. He stood back and looked at it. He thought about her standing in this room with the color swatches, holding them against the wall, rejecting 2 colors to find the right one. He thought, she would have found what she wanted in the yellow too. She always did. He went downstairs and ate lunch, and did not think further about it, because the decision was made, and it was a good one, and what came after a good decision was simply living in it. The photographs started appearing on the refrigerator in late March. 1 at first, then 2, then a small and specific cluster in the corner where Elaine had once kept Caleb's school papers. They were Caleb's own prints, in black and white, from a small printer he had bought with saved money. Ordinary subjects seen with specific attention, the corner of Scout's ear, the back step in afternoon light, the oak tree from directly below, its bare branches making a map against the sky. They were very good, not just for a 17-year-old. Good in the actual sense, the sense that lives past age and context. Marcus had gone to the hardware store that same week and bought a small cork strip and mounted it beside the refrigerator so the prints had room to breathe. Caleb had come home from school, seen the cork strip, and said, "Oh," quietly, to himself, in the tone of a person who has just been told something they needed to hear and didn't expect to hear it so simply. Owen came to the house for the first time on a Wednesday afternoon in April. He was tall and relaxed and had the easy warmth of someone who was comfortable with people, and Scout greeted him in the full ceremonial Scout manner, the investigation, the circles, the sitting and staring, and Owen submitted to all of it with the good humor of someone raised around animals. He and Caleb sat at the kitchen table, working through a chemistry assignment, and Marcus made dinner at the counter, and the room was full of the comfortable noise of ordinary life being lived. Laughter at something in the textbook, Scout settling under the table, Owen asking Marcus a question about construction loads that was more specific than Marcus had expected. "You're interested in engineering?" Marcus said. "Thinking about it," Owen said. "Civil, maybe. My uncle's a structural engineer. He talks about it like it's the best thing he's ever done. It is, if you do it right, Marcus said. Caleb looked across the kitchen at his father with an expression that Marcus recognized as pride, and which landed in his chest in a specific and irreplaceable way. The photograph that appeared on the cork strip in late April was different from the others. It was Marcus. Not posed, taken from across the living room on one of the pizza Saturdays, mid-conversation, his head back, his mouth fully open in a laugh, the genuine, unguarded, entirely unposed laugh of someone who has been caught off guard by something that was actually funny. Scout was in his lap. He looked completely present. He looked like himself, the version of himself that had been below the surface for a long time, coming through. He stood in front of it for a long time when Caleb put it up. "You could have warned me," he said. "Then you would have stopped," Caleb said. Marcus looked at the photograph. Then he went to his bedroom and got the frame from the corner of his desk, Elaine laughing at something just outside the Oregon shot, squinting into the coastal sun, and brought it to the kitchen and set it on the counter beside the refrigerator. He looked at both of them. Two people, caught mid-laugh at something that had surprised them. Two people who had both been photographed by someone who loved them, and had found the real version, the undefended version, the version that was too genuine to perform. "She'd have laughed at whatever it was too," Caleb said from behind him. "Yes," Marcus said, "she would have." He left both photographs there and went to make dinner, and the kitchen held both of them, the one who was here and the one who was everywhere she had been, and the house on Millbrook Lane was warm and full, and the oak trees outside were in full spring leaf, and the light came through the kitchen window at the new angle that belonged to April, and this was what getting there looked like. This was the thing on the other side of the door. November came again. The second November since the storm. A full year since Marcus Everett had reversed his truck on Hollow Creek Road in the rain, and reached into a cardboard box in a ditch, and pulled out the only one still fighting. Cedar Falls did November the way it always had, with an honest slowness. The leaves came off the maples first, then the oaks, then the lighter trees, and the neighborhood went from color to bare branches, in the patient way of something that was not in a hurry, and had no reason to be. The sky went to the layered gray of a region that understands November and does not argue with it. It was cold. It would rain. It would also, in its own way, be the most honest kind of beautiful. Marcus noticed all of this now. He noticed the sky. He noticed the quality of the morning light at different times of year, and what it did to the oak trees in the front yard, and the kitchen floor at 6 a.m. He noticed these things in the way of a person who had stopped running at full speed through every moment, and had found, to his very genuine surprise, that the moments were worth slowing down for. Caleb turned 18 in September, senior year, college applications on the kitchen table, conversations about what came next that Marcus no longer dreaded because he had learned, in the long way, that talking about the future was not the same as losing it. Caleb wanted to study photography, not as a minor, not as a supplement, as the main thing. He had built a portfolio over the summer that Marcus had looked at for a long time and said nothing about for 2 days, and then said, at breakfast on a Thursday morning, in the simple way he said things he meant completely, "This is serious work. You should do this." Caleb had looked at his cereal for a moment. Then he had looked at Marcus. "Yeah," he said, "I think so too." 3 of Caleb's prints had been shown in a small Cedar Falls gallery in August, as part of a youth exhibit. Marcus had gone on the opening night, alone at first, and then Claire had arrived because she had driven 4 hours from where she lived, and had not told Marcus she was coming, which was entirely a Claire thing to do. She had stood in front of each of Caleb's prints for a long time and said nothing, which was not a Claire thing to do, and which told Marcus everything he needed to know about what she thought of them. The gallery owner, a woman named Louise who had been running the space for 12 years, had said to Marcus at the end of the evening, "He sees things most people walk past." Marcus had thought about that on the drive home. He thought about it now, in November, a year later. He thought about where that seeing came from Elaine's eye for what mattered in a room, and from Caleb's own particular patience, which was his own, and had always been his own. He thought about what it meant to raise a person without knowing every single thing you were giving them, and then one day see it standing in a gallery, fully formed, yours and not yours at the same time. The birthday cake was Caleb's idea. Scout's birthday, calculated backward from Dr. Grant's intake estimate to the 6th of November. A year old. They made it on a Sunday morning. Peanut butter, banana, a small amount of honey, mixed into a thick batter and baked in a round pan, until the kitchen smelled like something that could not possibly be for a dog, and yet was. Caleb measured. Marcus monitored the oven with the attentiveness he gave to anything that could go wrong if unattended, which meant he also watched Scout, who had detected the peanut butter from 2 rooms away, and had appeared in the kitchen within 90 seconds, and was now circling the island, with the focused energy of an animal who knows something excellent is happening, and intends to be nearby when it concludes. He knows, Caleb said. He smells the peanut butter, Marcus said. That, and he knows it's for him. He does not know it's for him. He knows food is being prepared. He always knows food is being prepared. He once appeared from a dead sleep the moment you opened a bag of crackers. That was different. In what way? Caleb pointed at Scout, who had stopped circling, and was now sitting directly in front of Marcus, with perfect posture, and an expression of focused, expectant dignity. In what way does that not look like a dog who knows? Marcus looked at Scout. Scout looked at Marcus. Fine, Marcus said. He might know. Caleb grinned, the full, easy grin that had been coming back since November, the one that was Elaine's and his own at the same time. He definitely knows. They set the cake on the kitchen floor with a single candle. Caleb lit it and looked at Marcus, waiting. No, Marcus said. It would be good. No. Imagine how much he would enjoy hearing you sing happy. Caleb. Caleb was already laughing. Okay. Scout ate the cake in the time it takes to blink twice and then a little longer. He cleaned the pan. He sat back and looked at both of them with the expression of a creature who has received something appropriate and is making no specific complaint, but who would also not object to further investigation of what might be available. He wants more, Caleb said. He had the whole cake. It was a small cake. It was a full round cake. He's a year old. He's a large dog who has had sufficient cake. Marcus looked at Scout. No more cake. Scout looked at Caleb. Don't look at him, Marcus said. He agrees with me. Caleb did not confirm this, which was a communication in itself. They spent the afternoon in the particular way that Sundays had begun to go in this house, together, in the same spaces, doing different things, without requiring the rooms to be formal about it. Caleb worked on a college application essay at the kitchen table, reading pieces of it aloud occasionally to see how they sounded. Marcus went through project files at the counter. Scout moved between them according to his own shifting logic, settling first at Caleb's feet, and then at Marcus's, and then in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, where he could monitor both without choosing. Claire had visited in May, as promised, for a full week. She had spent 3 hours on the second evening looking at Caleb's photographs and asking him questions about how he thought about composition, about what drew him to ordinary subjects, about what he was looking for when he looked. She had cried twice during the week, once at the kitchen table with Marcus, once alone in the yellow guest room, and Marcus had not asked about the second time because he understood it without needing to. She was coming back for Christmas. Caleb closed his laptop at 5 and stretched his arms above his head and looked at Marcus. Can I ask you something? Yes. Are you scared? About next year? About me going? Marcus put down his pen. He looked at his son. The question was honest and direct and landed without softening, because Caleb had stopped softening things with his father in November, and the conversations between them since had been better for it in every way. Yes, Marcus said. Caleb absorbed this. Good, he said, and caught himself. I mean, not good that you're scared. Good that you said so. I know what you meant. I'm a little scared too, Caleb said. He looked at Scout, who had relocated to the living room floor, and was asleep in a patch of late afternoon light. Not of going, of leaving you here with just him. Marcus followed his gaze. Scout was on his back with all 4 legs at different angles, completely unconscious, deeply committed to what he was doing. He'll be fine, Marcus said. We'll be fine. You can call me, Caleb said. Whenever. I'll pick up. I'll call when I have something to say. You can call when you don't have something to say. Caleb looked at him steadily. That's allowed too. That's actually the point. Marcus looked at his son. At 18 years old, with Elaine's dark eyes and her way of going directly to what mattered, who had been in his room for 2 years, and had come out of it, and had come back to himself, and was going to take that self somewhere new, which was exactly what should happen, and which Marcus was both proud of, and quietly, privately terrified by, in the specific way a parent is terrified by the right thing. "Okay," Marcus said. "Okay," Caleb said. Scout, from the living room floor, sighed deeply in his sleep. After dinner, after Caleb went upstairs, Marcus sat in the living room armchair for a long time. It was a November evening in Cedar Falls. Outside, the bare oak trees stood in the dark with the patient permanence of things that have been standing longer than anything else on the street, and will be standing long after everything else changes. Inside, the house was warm. The blue cardigan was on the back of the couch where it lived now, where it had been since that Saturday, available and present, and no longer something that needed to be hidden from or managed. He sat in the armchair and let the quiet be what it was, which was not the old quiet. The old quiet had been the quiet of two people being very careful about everything, and the house holding all of what was absent. This was the quiet of a house that held everything, the present and the absent, the loss and the living, the photograph of Elaine on the counter, and the photograph of Marcus laughing that Caleb had taken and put on the cork strip without asking, and both of them there, both of them part of the room. He thought about the year. He thought about November last year, and sitting in this same chair looking at the same street, and the feeling of that quiet versus this quiet, and how much had happened between them. How a storm had come in ahead of the forecast. How he had almost not turned the truck around. How the smallest, most unlikely thing had found its way into the most locked room of the most organized man he knew, and had simply refused to leave. Not because it had a plan, not because it understood what it was doing, but because animals do not understand the complicated reasons that people give themselves for keeping doors shut, and they go to what they need without apology. He thought about Scout pressing his nose against the pale blue cardigan in a cold bathroom on a Saturday morning, and making that sound, that low, trembling sound that was not words, and was also the most direct thing Marcus had heard in 3 years. He could explain it now. Dr. Grant had explained it, the scent memory, the association, the remarkable architecture of a dog's nose, and what it can hold and recognize. He understood the mechanism. He had always been more comfortable with mechanisms than with mysteries. But he had stopped needing the mechanism to be the whole story. Because the whole story was this. A small animal had pressed itself against a piece of blue fabric and communicated, in the only language it had, that it recognized something precious. And in doing so it had cracked open a man who had been sealed for 3 years, and through the crack had come 3 years of grief and love, and the specific weight of carrying something enormous in silence. And on the other side of that crack was Caleb on the bathroom floor beside him, and pizza on a Saturday, and the cork strip on the wall, and Claire on the phone, and Monday evenings at the community center, and a yellow guest room, and Owen at the kitchen table, and Caleb's portfolio, and the right answer to "Are you actually okay?" The whole story was that Marcus Everett had almost driven past a box on a road in the rain, and had not. And everything that followed from that single decision had given him back his son, his grief, his sister, his mornings, and the slowly returning ability to sit in his own house and feel that it was his house, full of living and loss both, the way any real home eventually becomes. Scout stirred. He uncurled from his position in the doorway between the rooms and walked to Marcus and stood looking at him for a moment, and then sat down directly on Marcus's feet, not on the floor near Marcus's feet, on them, with the deliberate, unambiguous weight of a 65-pound dog who has decided where he is going to be and intends to remain. Marcus looked down at him. "Happy birthday," he said quietly. Scout looked up at him. The brown eyes were clear and warm and direct, the eyes of an animal that does not perform anything and has no interest in pretense and simply is what it is, entirely present, entirely there. Marcus reached down and put his hand on Scout's back, the warmth of him, the steady, living, reliable warmth of an animal that had arrived in a box in the rain a year ago and had not left and was not leaving. He sat for a long time in the quiet that was not lonely. He thought about Elaine choosing this house, negotiating the price herself because she had done the research and knew exactly what it was worth. Spending 3 weeks on the kitchen tile, matching the curtains to a thread in the rug, making every room the room she wanted because she understood that a house was not just a structure, but a container, for the specific life you intended to live in it. He thought about what she would think of the house now. Of the yellow guest room, and the cork strip, and the paw prints on the back door that never fully went away no matter how carefully he wiped them. Of Caleb's prints on the wall, and the way Scout slept in every room with equal confidence. Of the kitchen table, where two people now sat at both settings again. He thought she would be glad. He thought she would be very glad about all of it, but especially about Caleb, and especially about the fact that the door between them was open. And he thought she would say something characteristically direct about how long it had taken them to open it. And she would be right, and they would all agree with her. And then she would make tea at 9 o'clock, and sit at the kitchen table, and Scout would settle at her feet, and the evening would continue, in the warm, ordinary, irreplaceable way of evenings that are fully lived. He could not have her back. He knew this, with the clean clarity of a man who has stopped arguing with facts. What he had was everything she had built while she was here, and everything she had given the people she loved, and the small dog she may or may not have sent him in a box on a rainy road, depending on what you believed. And Marcus Everett was a blueprints and batch records man who had spent his career dealing in what could be proven. But he had reversed the truck. He had gone back. And maybe that was the only proof that mattered. That in the moment when it was easier to keep going, he had stopped. That in the moment when the door was closed, he had opened it. Not because he was certain, not because he had planned to, but because something in him, something underneath all the plans and the efficiency and the 3 years of fine, had recognized that the box was shaking. Scout breathed beneath his hand. The house was warm. Outside, the oak trees were bare and still and patient, standing exactly where they had always stood, waiting for the spring that would come the way it always came. First in the light, then in the buds, then all at once. Marcus looked at the blue cardigan on the back of the couch. He looked at the 2 photographs on the counter in the kitchen, both of them visible from where he sat. He looked at the dog on his feet, asleep now, heavy and steady and entirely at home. He turned off the lamp. He left the porch light on, the way he always did. Not because he was waiting for anything, not because anything was coming, just because the light was there, and it mattered to leave it on. And some things you did not because they were rational, but because they were right. He went upstairs. He lay down. He did not look at the ceiling. He looked at the dark for a moment, then closed his eyes, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, the dark felt like rest rather than something to get through. He slept. And the house on Millbrook Lane held everything it had always held, and one thing more. A family that had been broken open by the smallest possible thing, in the worst possible weather, at exactly the right time, and had found, on the other side of the opening, that what was inside had been waiting there all along.